Demand sensing is a forecasting method which combines the latest mathematical techniques with real-time information. It is also another buzzword in an industry which is currently plagued by them. Today, we're going to discuss how well this buzzword actually performs, and also whether you can tell between the difference between what is a good buzzword and actually what is a lot of marketing nonsense. So Johannes, demand sensing, what's your initial overview of a concept such as that?
It's a difficult question actually, because I've reviewed many documents about demand sensing, and the best thing about those documents that I can say is that they are exceedingly vague. So it's very hard to, attribute any specific qualities or defect to concepts that is like super vague. But fundamentally, I would say that demand sensing for me is a clear illustration of maybe what we could name as not vaporware, because it's not vaporware. The software are out. The software that is supposed to be capable of delivering, demand sensing to optimize your supply chain. So those pieces of software exist. So it's not vaporware, but I would say it's mootware. So like stuff that do not really matter, because actually it's not that it won't work, it's just it won't deliver what it promised. So it's mootware.
Okay, you said the ideas behind it are a little bit vague, but what's the basic concept?
So the concepts that are advertised, and again I'm saying advertised because literally it's in my book something that is more akin to a marketing gimmick to anything with any depth. But the things that are advertised are many. I mean, the attributes is use real-time data. We can come back to real-time data. Use data beyond your traditional core data. Something data that are not just past inventory movement, past sales, demand that are beyond that, and to basically use machine learning. Again, quite undefined what machine learning refers to in this context, to do some novel things to get more accuracy. That's probably what the crisp of what you can get from those documents presented by several large vendors about demand sensing.
Okay, so what are the things that indicate to you it's a bit of a marketing gimmick? Because I mean, all of those sort of concepts seem to sort of stand up on their own. So what are the problems here?
So the question is, how much novelty is there, in terms of depth? Let's start by what are we looking at. The main claim of the vendors who are pushing for, demand sensing technologies, the main claim is that they can get more accurate forecasts. Fair enough. That's a very reasonable claim. You say I have a novel technique that can produce more accurate, statistical prediction. Well, it turned out that those statistical prediction, those models, supply chain doesn't live in vacuum. There is, I would say, there is an entire field of research on statistical forecasting. There is tons of online competitions, where people are given data sets, they try models, they try to compete on that. So basically, the broad field of machine learning and of statistical learning is very, very vibrant by people that challenge each other, and the results are public. So there are conferences, journals, papers published by various sources that can be sometimes pure researchers, sometimes it's private laboratories. For example, the big software companies like the GAFAM, they all publish tons of papers. And what I'm saying is that although there are tons of things that are moving forward in, generally speaking, machine learning, including machine learning for the specific task of forecasting future demand, I've not seen anything that would qualify as for relatively good level journals or good level conference being published through those keywords, demand sensing.
So let's talk about the content itself. I mean, there's plenty of stuff out there on the internet. If you're doing some research regarding demand sensing, there's plenty of papers and things that seem to be kind of legitimate. So what's the problem with them?
If we review a bit what is being presented. So what is being presented is first this idea of having real-time data. Okay, why not? yet. Real-time data, first let's qualify a bit what do we mean by real-time data, because it sounds cool, it sounds cool. My perspective is real-time data is basically when the latency gets below human perception. So as a rule of thumb, if we want to clarify what we are talking about, it's a 100 milliseconds. It starts to become, it's not strictly below human perception, but it starts to be very close to what people would qualify as real-time. Okay, let's discuss in a supply chain problem the fact that you have data that is accessible, or that you have an entire pipeline of data that can process your data in less than 100 milliseconds to be real time. Do we have any chance of having, thanks to that, something that could be of the order of magnitude of a 50% improvement in forecasting accuracy? And here, I'm very, very, skeptical. Call me heavily skeptical, especially when people start to do, and again, you can look it up on Google, video demonstration about their software doing demand sensing and doing forecast. And what are they looking at in the demo? They look at a product with 3 years worth of history, and they are doing a 6 month ahead forecast. So we say, if you're forecasting demand 6 months ahead, the fact that you have data that is fresh from the last 100 milliseconds or fresh from the last 24 hours, so you have like data that are just lagging behind of 1 day, frankly speaking, it's not going to make much difference. I'm not even sure that having data that is 2 days old instead of 1 day old is actually going to make even a 1% difference 6 months ahead. So that's where I say the real-time part of the argument feels exceedingly shallow to me. And then let's look at the other part of the arguments. They claim to have superior machine learning technique. But superior machine learning technique, as machine learning is like a super broad field. It would be like a car manufacturer that say, oh, we have the better car because we have better physics. Yeah, having better physics help. But that's a bold claim that you're making. Better physics, really? You did a breakthrough at the level of the physical law? Really? So again, color me skeptical when you're making this sort of claim. So basically what they have is, if I fall back to the other set of arguments, is say you need to have a forecast that use more data than traditional methods. I would say yes, absolutely. I mean, we have discussed in this show, many times the fact that naive time series forecasting gives you tons of garbage. The simplest explanation is that if you only look at your historical sales, you don't take into account stock outs, for example. You didn't observe any sale, anything being sold, you had a stock out, so you don't want to forecast zero because you've observed zero. So your historical sales are not the historical demand. So yes, you need to include more data on top of that. Absolutely. And that, by the way, can lead to very substantial improvement.
So what you're kind of saying is that the use of this real-time information is pretty much overkill for a supply chain scenario, because actually you don't need that level of information that sort of quickly.
Exactly.
So what sort of level of granularity do we actually need?
But again, if you're piloting picking robots real-time in a warehouse, then 100 milliseconds might actually be too slow. So it really depends on the type of problem. But again, people who are, pushing for demand sensing, they are not. Their use case is not the real-time control of super fast robots in automated warehouses. This is not what they are discussing about. This is not what they are showing in their demos. What they are showing in their demos is stuff that looks very similar to the old way of doing, supply chain planning, where you start looking at your sales, your demand, anywhere from 3 weeks to 9 months or even a year ahead. And that's where I really challenge the fact that having real-time data for this sort of situation is going to make any difference. That's what I truly challenge.
Okay, so who's it really benefiting then? Would you say it's purely a marketing gimmick to sort of sell other pieces of software?
This is a case where when I was saying about this term of mootware, software you should not care about, software that are moot. It's literally a marketing gimmick for vendors that are short on new ideas, short on technologies, short probably on expertise. That they just decide to take the road of the marketing gimmick because there is no substance whatsoever. And I know it's relatively harsh, but frankly, I don't see any better explanation because the problems that we're facing are so challenging. There are so many angles that can be discussed and improved that, frankly, you don't need, as a vendor, Lokad as a vendor, we don't need to go invent our own buzzwords. There is so many angles that needs to be refined to present something new. If you have to resort to a completely made up buzzword that happens to be just a shallow marketing gimmick, it doesn't put the teams behind those company in I would say in good light. I mean, it shows a certain indifference to the problems faced by the clients, and they think that they can also. It also shows some degree of arrogance in the sense that they think that the client is just an idiot and that you can literally push anything to them. It's at some point it's kind of an insult to the intelligence of who you're selling to.
Okay, so how do we kind of differentiate then? Because there's so many of these buzzwords out there. There's so many different things that we're going to have to kind of look into and different research we'd have to do. How can you differentiate between what is actually a good buzzword and what is actually a load of nonsense?
First, I would say one way is just have a broad look about who is talking about this buzzword. Is it just your vendor? Or is it, are there plenty of people from different fields, people who do not have like convergent interest, people who have no reason to copy each other? Because the thing is about this demand sensing is that basically it was one vendor pushing it and the other vendors just copying the shallow marketing gimmick. So you start with something that is just a marketing gimmick and it ended being replicated marketing-wise by other actors. There is no substance, so it makes it relatively easy to replicate the stuff. When you have actual technology, it's actually harder to replicate. If the only thing that you have to replicate is a fancy website, much easier. But I digress. So back to identify, is there different people that talk about that? Another example of something that we discussed at Lokad extensively was probabilistic forecasting. If you look online for who is discussing about probabilistic forecasting, you will find that there are actually tons of other communities. For example, people who are studying climate are heavily using probabilistic models. And when you want to think about climate change, etc., state-of-the-art research is clearly driven by probabilistic models. It has nothing to do with supply chain, not directly in any way. But still, it proved that the concepts are appealing and useful to super diverse groups, and that I think is a very important flag. Another flag, another indicator is appeal to authority. When there are people who are just pushing forward, say, oh, demand sensing is really such a tremendous new way of doing forecasting, and make bold claims and whatnot, and then the first thing that they do, instead of detailing, the algorithm and the math on how they do that, do they do that? No, absolutely not. They would actually put forward the name and title and pedigree of the authors of the thing. Say, oh, we have Dr. X, PhD, Y, to do that with 20 years of experience here and there. And that's basically when you put forward the resume of the people up front, it's literally an appeal to authority. So that's usually it means that your ideas lack substance. That it's otherwise you don't need to have your resume. Scientific papers, you just have the name of the researchers, the institution, not their resume.
Okay, so if demand sensing is an example of maybe a bit of a marketing gimmick, are there lots of other examples out there in the supply chain industry of gimmicks that have kind of not done so well historically?
Yes, I mean, not just supply chain. I mean, again, supply chain, I think it's one of those typical case of market that are dominated by large enterprise vendors who are playing those games a lot. But it's not the only area. Shallow buzzwords. There has been quite a few. I mean, for example, IBM 10 years ago made a big push for their autonomous computing. It turned out to be a big pile of nothing. There were a lot of people who started to push for things like, for example, before people were crazy about data science, people were crazy about data mining. There was like it was a big thing 20 years ago. There was the idea of extracting data nuggets. I'm not even sure if people remember what it was supposed to be, etc., etc. So there has been, a long series of buzzwords, of shallow buzzwords, but it's actually quite hard to even remember them, because precisely there is very little substance. And to prepare this episode about demand sensing was actually quite hard for me, because I was reading dozens of pages about demand sensing, and literally, after spending half an hour reading documents on that, I was trying to summarize what have I learned, and I was finding myself of nothing. So it's even hard to memorize this sort of stuff. So that's a challenge.
So what's normally the outcome then? Is it kind of these kind of buzzwords just kind of fall by the wayside because there's no substance behind them, and the industry kind of moves on to the next one?
Yeah, I mean, yes, that's my personal, what I call the law of preservation of hype. There is the law of preservation of mass in physics. And as far the marketing of enterprise vendors are concerned, there is this law of preservation of hype. There is like a total mass of hype. And if you have like a buzzword that enters the pile, something else exits the pile. And so if you, and you can actually empirically verify my law of conservation of hype by looking at Google Trends, this tool provided by Google. So if you do the total amount of queries for many buzzwords, over time, you will see that it's kind of a constant. For example, if you take many buzzwords like AI, cloud computing, big data, machine learning, and whatnot, you put all those buzzwords together, and you will see that over time, it's kind of a constant, even if each buzzword has typically is a spike and then fades. So yes, clearly you have this sort of patterns.
Okay, so let's sort of start rounding things up a little bit. For a supply chain practitioner who's looking at maybe the next big buzzword in the future, what should they be on the lookout for?
I think they should be on the lookout for stuff that fundamentally, seems to address something pretty fundamental with an insight that, when looking back, is completely obvious. So say that's the surprising thing about science is that when you have things that are profoundly true and profoundly efficient, you look back at them and you wonder, but how can I? It feels so obvious that I would say, how can I have been so ignorant before that? It fall into place like, but yes, obviously. And for example, for let's say for supply chain, for example. At Lokad, before we started to realize that when we wanted to look at demand, we had to look at demand with bias, with a purpose. Like, for example, that was the birth of those quantile forecasts. That was the idea that the risks are concentrated at the extreme, not the middle. And then once we realized this simple idea that, yes, absolutely, it's obviously stockouts and write-offs that drive my cost. It's not when inventory rotates gently. And it's something that it's so important that you cannot even unlearn that. It's it may click and then you say, oh, it's very important. So I would say when you see a buzzword and you say click, it's very important. I have understood something very fundamental. Usually it's not something incredibly difficult. At the core of those massive innovation, usually it's something that is fundamentally simple. If I tell you cloud computing, you could think, oh, it's super complicated. But then I tell you, it's just hardware resources on demand. And when I mean on demand, you can just say, give me a machine, a computing machine in the next minute, and bam, I have it. And you have like big vendors, large scale, that can sell you processing power available on demand the next minute. Once you've understand that, you kind of understand a lot of things about cloud computing. So those keywords, they typically, yes, there is tons of tech, and the devil is in the details. But the key insights, if you cannot in a few minutes get, you know, some I would say core insights that truly that truly strikes you as, well, this is a very good, you know, solid extra understanding for my business that I have here, and I need to take advantage of this extra insight. And maybe to take advantage of this extra insight, I will need like a truckload of extra tools. But if there is not that, then most probably what you're looking has no substance whatsoever, and it's just a big pile of nothing.
Okay, great. We'll have to wrap it there, but thanks for your time. So that's everything for today. If you agree or disagree, make sure you drop us a comment below. And that's everything for this week. We'll see you next time.